5 years ago at the Constitution Center, First African Baptist celebrated 200 years of ministry in Philadelphia and in the state of Pennsylvania. We came to reflect on the goodness of God and what He's done for this great church and the things that this church has done in the city of Philadelphia. That First African Baptist Church is intricately weaved into the fabric of the Philadelphia story. 5 years later, we come now to celebrate our 205th. This is our history. God has given me a noble opportunity to pastor this historic church, the First African Baptist Church of Philadelphia. I'm a student of history, and so I love history. And I didn't realize when I came to this church in 2001, the enormous history that surrounded this great church called the Mother Church of all African American Baptist churches in the state of Pennsylvania. First African Baptist Church was started in the year 1809 when 10 progressive, visionary women and 3 men, visionary men, decided to leave First Baptist 17th and Sansom and form their own church, which is today known as the First African Baptist Church of Philadelphia. They were given letters of dismission and they formed this historic church. The first pastor was Reverend Henry Cunningham, and the second pastor was Reverend White. The third pastor, the Reverend James Barrows, was a slave in Northampton County in Virginia. 3 freedmen, Samuel and John Bivens, sold themselves into slavery so that this great pastor could become the third pastor of this church. Now, somebody said that Barrows had to be a preaching man in order for 2 people to sell themselves into slavery. We say that's great sacrifice. That's living for the sake of others. And this is the spirit of First African Baptist Church. Reverend Theodore Darty Miller, another great preacher of this church, led this church and increased numbers. And then came the Reverend Credit, William Credit, Dr. Credit, another visionary man who took over the reins just at the turn of the 1800s. And within a few years, decided that the quarters that they occupied was not large enough for the numbers of people that were pouring into First African Baptist Church. So William Credit sent his people out to look for land. And they found land at 16th and Christian, what is now known as 16th and Christian. They bought the property, I think, for about $16,000. And then began erection when John S. Trower, a trustee of a church and a wealthy businessman, put up or guaranteed a loan of $100,000 so that this church, a church here on the corner of 16th and Christian, could be built from scratch. It was not a church that they occupied, that somebody else built. It was not a church that they bought. It was a church that they built from the ground up. And the thing about it is, the structure of this church, the architecture, really tells us that Credit and his members had a vision for the future, because we're still here today at this location. And the church is very much adequate for what we are doing here in South Philadelphia and city of Philadelphia, which is a testament that over 100 years ago, these people were actually thinking beyond their times. Reverend Credit left around 1950, resigned, but you must know that he started the Downtown Industrial School The first savings and loans for African American was started under his administration, and the first mortgage company so that African Americans can purchase homes. He resigned in 1915 and pastored Penn Memorial until his death sometime in 1921. But another great pastor came, Reverend Harrod, William Harrod. William Harrod led the church until his death sometime around 1947. Then came the Reverend D. Manning Jackson from San Antonio, Texas. Reverend Manning lasted 2 years, and then a son of the church, Reverend Charles Sumner Lee, one of the great pastors of this church, and his son, Dr. Allen Lee, reflects quite a bit on days when he would come and hear his father practice his sermon in the study that I now occupy.
One of my earliest childhood memories was something that I guess was a little out of the ordinary for a preacher's child, but you know, I would sit in the pews with my mother and look up and see my father in the pulpit, and he wasn't Reverend Lee, he was Daddy. I remember at one particular moment, I guess I was perhaps 3 or 4, I broke away from my mother and kind of crawled right under one of the pews in front and then up over the next pew, and then just sort of an over and under sort of pattern, trying to get up to the pulpit, not so much to see my father, but to get to the music director, Ronald Cross. Because Ronald was a fun guy, and he had one particular trick that I really appreciated, which was he would let me pull and snap his suspenders. And so church services can be long, and at some point I broke away from my mom, and I was heading up for Ronald Cross there during the service because I was going to snap his suspenders. At some point, my father did get off the pulpit and intercept me before I got there to the organ. And I'm told that he liked to tell the story. I remember later that he took me downstairs and into the Sunday school room downstairs and put a little fear of the Lord into my backside. But I don't remember that part, and I suspect that was a bit of hyperbole on his part, exaggeration, that never really happened. But that was my great escape as a young child, probably my earliest memory in this particular church.
Reverend Lee died in 1974. Reverend Randall McCaskill pastored from 1976 until 1979. And the Reverend Elvis Lee Turner pastored from 1981, 1 year being interim from 1980 to 1981 until the year 2001. And I came in 2001 and pastors a church today. chapter 2, it's told by the Lord to speak to Zerubbabel and also Joshua, the son of Josedek. In his speaking to them, he asked the question, who among you saw this house in her former glory, and how do you see her now? And in answering the question that he asked, in verse 9 of chapter 2, he says emphatically that the Lord of hosts says that the latter house will be greater than the former house. We come again to celebrate 205 years with this deep assurance that the first African of today and the first African of the future will be a greater house than the first African of years ago. And for this, we will give God all the praise and all the glory. So we celebrate today, we reflect on yesterday, and we wait with bated anticipation on what is yet to come in tomorrow. Thank you for coming, and I pray that God will bless you. We really appreciate you.